When I was a college student, I heard one of the funny sermons. It was about encouraging the people in the church, in the pews, to do the work of evangelism. Okay? And he addressed the fears of the congregation that they wouldn't know how to answer the questions, they wouldn't know how to handle objections, that sort of a thing. And he says, and I've got exactly what you need to say, and it'll answer every question. Okay? And he says, and it's real simple, and you can all learn it. It just takes about 5 or 7 words. Okay? The answer was, I don't know. Come to church with me and see. Okay? And we howled every time he used that line. But it's so true. And that's what happens in VBS, all right? You may not have thought about it, but parents get very desperate in the summer. You know why? Kids are home from school. And they don't know what they're going to do, especially if they're working parents. And so a lot of them would be more than happy to hear that there is a place. And, vacation Bible schools are starting to go into a decline. Many churches I know are just canceling vacation Bible schools. We have been kind of different. Our VBS isn't just a half day, which is the way most churches run their vacation Bible schools. We provide an all-day one because we know that many of the parents are, in fact, working. And so it would be difficult to, work half day and then try to take care of kids the other half of the day. So anyway, this is a great opportunity to get into sharing the gospel, evangelizing, inviting, getting into the habit of inviting. And, they'll be happy to hear of it. They won't find it offensive at all. And so if you are shy, if you are reluctant, this is a great way for you to do it, okay? Really, this is the one supreme work of the congregation, right? One guy can only reach to so many people. But if the whole congregation is doing inviting, then it'll work, all right? And they've made it so simple. They give you this colorful flyer. It's got all the information. Okay, so let's take advantage of that, and we'll proceed. Okay, let me turn off this mic. This is like the Nixon tapes. There's a gap. All right. I learned this week from last week that I don't have to wear my magic ears the whole time, and I can put them back into their charging case and save it up for Sunday school time when I need to listen to the kids when they give answers. But it was so nice because today when we sang, two of the songs I kind of knew, but there were parts of those songs that I hadn't learned before. So I could just tune up the volume, increase it up, and I could hear and I can learn the other parts that I didn't learn. So it's kind of nice. Okay, we're going to start this morning with a quiz. How's that for a winning start? Okay, have you heard this quote? Is that easy? Yes or no is the answer. Okay, have you heard this quote? You ready? All right. Conquering the world on horseback is easy. Dismounting and governing it is not. You heard that before? No. Come on. Everybody knows this one. I'm just kidding. Okay. This you can tell from the quote that this is not a 20th century quote, right? Who goes and tries to conquer the world from a horseback nowadays? This one goes all the way back to the 1200s. And it came from a very famous Asian who conquered much of the world. Yeah, Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan. But you know what? It still holds true, and we have a modern version of it. I first learned the modern version of it during the Iraq wars. Remember, we had two wars with Iraq, right? And the first one was when they invaded Kuwait. And Bush number one went in there and cleaned it up. How long did that war take? 100 days. Okay, that's just barely over 3 months. So it was so easy. That was when the joke of applied, Iraqi, it's an Iraqi tank. You know why? It has 3 speeds forward and 10 speeds backwards. Okay, so anyway, we cleaned up. But you know what? We couldn't follow up. Then the second time we won in fighting against them, we tried to go in and settle everything and govern for a while. And that's when the phrase, winning the war but losing the peace, became popular. We couldn't win the peace. We couldn't win the hearts and minds of the people. Now, it's not like it can't be done. Remember, after World War II, we did a great job, not only of winning the war, but we won the peace. What did we do in Europe? We came up with something, come on, you guys went to school just like me, the Marshall Plan, right? Well, we airlifted all kinds of stuff over there and rebuilt Europe. And by rebuilding Europe, we did so much to keep the world from sliding into communism. And then in Asia, when we defeated the Japanese, how did we treat them? We treated them like long-lost brothers. Okay? I mean, it was amazing that a very fierce war general like MacArthur, when he came to dealing with the Japanese, showed such grace and kindness and support. Okay? And so we built them up. They became a thriving nation and one of our global partners today. And once again, we won the peace. And so it can be done, but it takes an effort. It takes an understanding and awareness that we need to do that. And too many times, we don't know how to do that. In fact, let me tell you, this idea of winning the peace is applicable to our daily lives. And I've learned it the hard way. Let me give you some examples. Okay? This one is from parenting. Okay? In parenting, we as parents hold all the power, right? We do. We can control the curfew, we can control the car keys, we can control the wallet, we can do everything to them. And so we can always win the argument if we exerted all of our power. But what happens, I find, is that if you win, slam dunk too hard, kids can go in one of two ways. They can go into a passive mode, all right? And they say, okay, I'm not somebody that my parents believe in. I don't have any sense of independence. I'll never really be anything more than just totally do what my parents tell me to do. And they become passive and sometimes fearful. Or you get a stronger child, and what do they go into? They go into rebellion, right? And it could be active rebellion or it could be passive rebellion. And the ones who go into passive rebellion, passive aggressives, they will wear you out eventually. But the thing that's really lost is what? In either case, the thing that's lost is the relationship. And you lose the relationship and you've lost everything. You have, in fact, lost big time. Because it can carry over, and now our boomer generation discover when their children won't let their parents see their children. In other words, won't let grandparents see grandchildren. Or they control it and have all kinds of rules and keep it to a very narrow window. That's a symptom that you've lost the relationship, you've lost the trust. Okay? And that is going on, and that's a reality. And then, this happens at work too. Again, as a supervisor, you can be really hard. You can squeeze everything you can out of your employees. You can treat them rough, and you can use all your power. But how do you end up losing the war? They leave. And the word gets out, and nobody wants to come in. And pretty soon, you've got a department, but you've got no employees and nobody to help you to get the job done. And so that's another example of it. And so, it's so tempting for us to focus on the immediate problem just to get past it. But, if we neglect the long-term consequences, if we forget the bigger picture, if we forget the ultimate priorities, we can lose big time. We don't want to win small and lose big, right? Not in any part of our lives. So Nehemiah gets this wall built, and he's driving these people, right? Bricks in one hand, sword in the other hand, work double shift, long hours, sleep by the wall you're working on. And lo and behold, miracles, they finish in 52 days. Wonderful, wonderful thing. And he could have said, well, I'm done. And he could split. But he had a city that looked like Watts after the riots, or worse. And he realized, I've got a bigger job to take care of. I got to rebuild Jerusalem. And if I don't rebuild Jerusalem, what's the use of building this wall? What's the value of a 52-day miracle construction project? And so he realized that. I think of the many cities who host the Olympics. And to host the Olympics, they all have to build what? An Olympic village for the athletes. They often have to build new stadiums. They often have to build new roads and new railways and new infrastructure and all of that. And city after city, when they don't think through the long term, they build all of this, And after the Olympics and the crowds are gone, it decays. It crumbles. And all those millions and millions are wasted because they didn't think long term. They didn't think about the big picture. They didn't think about long consequences. And so the mere effort, seemingly glorious for a moment, becomes a mockery. And so that's why Nehemiah doesn't leave. This is why we have chapter 7. Because chapter 7 is the turning point in the bigger story. And that is a story of repopulating Jerusalem and rebuilding the nation. The enemies have been defeated, but throughout the upcoming chapters, you're going to see that they're going to keep trying different things. And it would have been tempting. It would have been so tempting for Nehemiah to, hey, take a break, right? I need a sabbatical now. This has been tough on me. I've never done this before. And he could have done it and nobody would have complained. But he got right to work on stage 2. He didn't want to miss a beat. He knew better. He knew that he had to win the peace. And so he decided that he needed to act. And what is winning the peace? It meant bringing not only the Jews back into Jerusalem, but helping them to reclaim their identity, who they were as God's special people, through whom he was going to what? Bless the whole world. See, the Jews were constantly forgetting their purpose, their calling for God. And they started to think, well, we got God, and you can't have any of him. And God didn't want that. They wanted them to receive the blessings of God, and then share the blessings of God to proclaim a good God who for so loved the whole world. And so he needs to get them back on purpose and back together. And so he starts to do the work. And in chapter 7, 90% of the verses are names. All right, Hebrew names. And you're going to have to read every one of them out loud. No, I'm kidding. Okay, we're not going to do names, but follow me as I take you through the first few verses of chapter 7. Then I'm going to jump through and show you the categories of people that are listed here, because this is going to be important for us to know later, okay? So Nehemiah 7, verse 1, and I'm going to read, and you guys hopefully can follow up on the screen. Now when the wall had been built, and I had set up the doors, and the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed, I gave my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem. For he, Hananiah, was more faithful and God-fearing man than many. And I said to them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot. And while they are still standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors. Appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some at their guard posts and some in front of their own homes. The city was wide and large, but the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt. So he's got a sense of the situation. And, when he first proposed in chapter 2, the rebuilding, it wasn't just of the wall. He talked about the city. So when he made his reconnoiter of the walls, we now know he was also checking out the city. And so he has a sense of the complete job that had to be done. And so we are seeing what a thorough guy he is. Then it says, after he saw and had the conclusion that the city was big and we got to do something because it has got few people and there were many places that needed to be rebuilt, he comes before the Lord, verse 5, then my God put into my heart to assemble the nobles and the officials and the people to be enrolled by genealogy. Okay? Very important. And I found the book of the genealogy of those who came up at the first 150 years ago, and I found written in it, and then he starts the list. And the list starts with the original leaders, the two guys that were leading the people out of Babylon to begin the reworking of the Jewish people and their land. It says, these were the people of the province who came up out of the captivity of those exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried into exile. They returned to Jerusalem and Judea, each to his own town. They came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and then I'm going to stop reading because those were the two main leaders. Okay? But in verse 8, he starts to talk about the people in general. And he goes through a whole list where he says, the sons of. And so this is where you're using the genealogy. You're following the family line. And you see time and again, it says the sons of this person, the sons of that person. Then starting at verse 26, he starts a different way of telling the people. He says, the men of Bethlehem and Netophah, okay? 188 of them. And so now he starts to talk about people who came from their hometowns. So that's a different way of organizing the people. Then starting at verse 39, he goes through three specific groups of those who worked did religious work. The priests in 39, the Levites in 43. In 46, he talks about the temple servants. 57, he talks about the sons of Solomon's servants. And then in 60, he tallies them all up. And then in 60 to 66, he comes across and he talks about the names of people who couldn't prove their lineage, that they were authentically Jewish. Starting at 61, I think we only need to look at verse 61. And so it says they couldn't prove their father's house nor did they descend. This one talks about the lay people. Further on down, it talks about people who claim to be priests, and they couldn't find authentication for them either. And so he says, okay, the people who we can't prove your line, you don't have a part in it, and those who claim to be priests, we're going to have to put you through some qualifying exams. Okay? And so he goes through all of this and begins to set them aside for the repopulation. And so he's going to do this repopulation, and this is the important work he's going to do, but he's got three very important ways that he is going to be working this. He's going to first bring people in for the purpose of community. All right? He had said that they were few, and so he was going to bring them in. In chapter 11, you see the method by which he does it. He says, 1 out of 10 has got to come back into the city. And so they can decide how they're going to do it. And so the people came in, and most of them turned out to be volunteers, people who were willing to do that. And so he's going to bring them back into the city. Why? This is not just a civic project. Nehemiah is doing something because, first of all, Jerusalem is a place God has chosen to place his name. So for God's glory, he needs to have Jerusalem be restored. A lot of churches, when they are depopulated, they have an interesting practice. They will not sell to anybody. They will only sell it to another Christian group. Why? Because this ground has been sanctified. So, you can't turn it into a shopping mall. Okay? You can't make it into a strip mall. You got to keep it for the Lord and for his glory. So that's the first thing that he's trying to do. But he's going beyond that. He also wants to bring them to a second place which is to develop a sense of community. He's organized and listed them by town and by family. And when he brings them in, just like he did during the construction of the walls, where he had them work by families, work by guilds and trades, he's going to probably do the same thing in Jerusalem so that there will be a jewelry district. Do we have a jewelry district in LA? Yeah, we do, all right? We have a flower district, we have a clothing district, okay? And so what happens is this then becomes a magnet for people to come, and it makes the place thrive. But basically, he's got to get them in close enough so that they can interact. And interacting is so important to becoming a community. We do not become a community by being at the same place at the same time. We need to interact. We need to know one another. We need to get into the details of our lives. Acts chapter 2 talked about community. And what did they do? They met daily in the temple and in the houses. And they held everything in common. And so you never saw such close community. I was at a seminar once with a very well-known pastor. And you know what he was telling his congregation to do? He's saying, all of you who live beyond a certain distance from the church, sell your house and then buy within certain location within the church area. And that way, we can get together weekday evenings and share food together, right? And you don't have to cook the whole thing. Everybody can just potluck. And guys, we can meet together and we can play basketball together. And he's saying, this is how we're going to build community. And you need to have community because basically, it's not just about civics. It's just not about commerce. And the third thing that it leads to is this. Because when the pastor said, and we're going to play basketball together, he says, and guess what? Invite your coworkers. Invite your unbelieving friends. They may not come to church, but they will play basketball. And so there was an evangelistic purpose to the whole thing. And so as they built up Jerusalem and they have this great Jewry district, the women from the other towns are going to drag their husbands. They're going to come. And the opportunity for interaction, the opportunity for evangelism takes place, and they fulfill their purpose as God's people. It's not that hard. Remember I told you about our new neighbors when we first moved in? And when they found out I was a pastor, and they go, uh-oh. And they can see it coming, right? Judgment. And over the time we've been with them, we've built up a relationship. 2 former professors from San Diego State University. One of them is an artist. And so she has her art gallery, and she does a show. I make sure I show up and enjoy her art, or try to enjoy her art. Fortunately, it's the kind of art I can enjoy. And so now we have a relationship. Well, they just went to Europe on a 3-country tour, and I was so shocked when they came over and says, here, Ken, I want you to watch the house. Here are my keys. Aren't you afraid I'm going to go in and do something? No, they knew they could trust. They knew they had a relationship. And they gave Pat a big hug before they left. And that's the way we show the love of God. And this is how we lay the groundwork for true evangelism. The whole idea about the good news is God so loved the world. All right? It's good news for us that people accept the Lord. But the good news for them is God so loved the world, including you. And so this is why he's trying to build up the community, to repopulate. We need to repopulate. I see a lot of empty chairs here. Okay? Do you believe that someday we could be just as full as the Mandarin service? Yeah, you want to believe that, you got to believe that. Think of it. There's more non-Mandarin people in the neighborhood than Mandarin people, right? So eventually, we should have more. And we need to repopulate. So we need to learn to love. to be more of a family. And we've been doing that. I'm so gratified when I heard one of the old-timers say, now I feel like we're a family. And so we've been building that kind of foundation. It takes a while. But we're getting some of that thing together, and now we're ready to start evangelizing, to invite. We need to be great neighbors, full of love to friends and co-workers so that we can bring them in. And I love how God has these huge lists of names. And what it says to me is people matter, individuals matter. You know, we need to remember people's names. We need to know the details of their lives. When we get to the point where we know the details of people's lives, they become more than stick figures. You know how people draw stick figures when they're little kids? Or they draw one that's just a kind of an outline, but there's nothing filled in except a couple of dots for the eyes and a big smiley face mouth. You know, we look at people the same way too often. We know nothing about each other. You know, we don't know about their relatives. We don't know about their family, where they grew up, what skills that they have, what they enjoy doing. All of this is important to say, you matter. Because unless people really matter, you don't really love. Love is an abstraction. And we got to get out of speaking about love in the church as an abstraction. You see? It's got to be real. And they know that it's real. Or they know that you're just doing a task. Second thing he does is this. He provides for effective future leadership. Okay, and I'm just going to talk about Hananiah. And he says he was more faithful and feared God more than most people. Woody Allen said what? Half of life is just showing up. Let's face it. As I have watched each generation since the 20th century, in my few years, we're getting worse and worse at showing up. I'm not even going to talk about showing up on time. That's a whole different topic. But just showing up. People who have responsibilities, people whom you should expect would be regular and consistent. First opportunity, they flake away. And so, you can't build on that. Pastor I knew said, you know what? As a leader, if you want people to go 2 steps with you, you got to take 5 steps. That's the kind of person Hananiah was. He feared God more than most, and he was faithful. And so a faithful person you can count on. You can believe not only that he's going to show up, but he's going to do his job, and he's going to do it to the best of his ability. And so if something matters to you, that's how you got to behave. As a husband, that's how you got to behave. As a parent, that's how you got to behave. Whatever you're doing, this is the way you need to behave. Otherwise, future generations won't have a clear thing to follow. And so, fearing God, we're not going to spend too much time on that, but, it's one of the most underrated and yet the most important bottom lines about being a Christian. People, before there was a Bible, before God called Abraham, people feared God. They knew from looking in the sky that there was something great and awesome and powerful. And they showed respect. And they realized that, we better find a way to worship this God. We got to find out what God's will is. Was that storm an expression that he's unhappy? Was that flood an expression of his judgment? And so God mattered in their lives, and you took God seriously. And today, we tend to think God is easy. God is like a grandfather. He'll let things slide. Well, he will, up to a point. And then you know what happens? before he even judges you, he lets you fall into your own mess. That usually, happens way before. Because why? We won't learn. Only when we fall into our own mess will we learn. And we're responsible for it. We can't blame it on God. We can't blame it on anybody. See, and he's still giving us mercy. He hasn't judged. And so fearing God is so important. And he's looking for these kind of people that the future generations can see and want to imitate. And he puts them in place, and he gives them very minimal things. He entrusts, and then he trusts. Sometimes I see people whom I've entrusted make mistakes. And it's everything I can do to come in and try to correct them. But you know what? I know if I correct you too much, you're going to be either the disheartened server or you're going to become the rebellious server. And so I got to give you time to grow so that your values can mature, so that your sensitivity to the Lord can become more deeply understood. And because we're not here for a show. We're not here to project an image. We're here to build community and to develop leadership. That's the whole thing. Once we learn to be a disciple like Jesus, we're going to be natural-born leaders, right? The kind of people who draw people. The kind of people that when we talk, people take us seriously. Even if they disagree, they treat us with respect. Okay, the third thing we see Nehemiah doing in here. Oh, and so the question to this part is, do we in our church have the Hananiahs, the Hananiahs? Do we have the people who can be appointed? I showed up this morning and Brother Paul wasn't here. And I was reminded, that generation is quickly fading away. And we can't keep leaning on that old generation. We got to start stepping up. Big time, like they did. See? So, back to going to the third one. And this is so valuable. The third thing we see, and this is why the genealogies and their professions and their families are given here, it's to connect this generation to the old generation. These are your origins. This is your family line. This is the town that you are from. You have the honor of all of that, and you are proceeding forward from all of that. And so what it does is it gives people roots, but it gives them something else. It gives them a chance to build on something ongoing. And not only on something that's ongoing, but they're building on what? They're building on something that God has been doing. Since he created Adam, since he called Abraham, since he brought the people out in the first Exodus to create a nation in a place called the Promised Land. They have to realize that they are the second Exodus, and they are going to repopulate and reclaim the Promised Land. And people need that their lives are significant. And I don't care how much money you make, it's not going to give you a feeling of significance. Studies show that these are kind of old studies, probably about 20 years old, but when you have earned $60,000 as your income, money is not going to give you that much more satisfaction. I would guess we have to adjust that modern times, maybe 100,000. Okay? Buying more toys isn't going to make you that much happier. You really want your life to be connected to something far greater than your pocketbook, than your bank account, toward your little house. And this is what he's doing. He's saying, you know what? And someday there's going to be a third Exodus. You know who's in the third Exodus? You and me. Okay? We have begun that Exodus when we accepted Jesus Christ, and someday when Christ comes, he's going to call us all home to the real promised land. Okay, and so this is our story. And so now Hananiah and Nehemiah, their stories will be appended to the story that's here. Their story becomes a part of God's greater story. How many of you can name all the signers of the Declaration of Independence? Right on, Andy. About 2 or 3 names, right? But you know what? Those people don't care. What was important was they put their John Doe on that paper. They were part of something far greater than themselves. They were a part of a movement that would eventually become the flowering of a nation that will make a real difference in world history. Well, we are called to put our John Does into something cosmic, not just global, but cosmic. See, and that's what he's doing for the people in Jerusalem there. And that's our application, that we have a chance to become a part of all of this. Jesus told a story in Matthew 12 that should scare the daylights out of every one of us. He talked about if a man has a demon thrown out and he's all cleaned up and now he's feeling pretty good about himself. He's received the grace of God. But you know what? He doesn't do anything except look nice. And what happened? The same demon came back and brought 7 more demons. You know, that's what's happening all around Christianity. People get cleaned up, they experience the grace of God. But guess what? No purpose to fill their lives. They're happy with their salvation. They're happy to be cleaned up. And pretty soon they fall back into the ways of the world. Right? Because they haven't found that greater, higher cosmic purpose. I see more and more Christians acting like locusts. Right? Eat the land clean. I see people eating from this church, these things, eating from that church, those things, and they're just moving around, and nowhere are they making a difference. Making a contribution, building at a certain place, a town or a family, and becoming a part of the community. See, so this is what Nehemiah's got the rest of his 12 years to do. And it's tough. But you know what? God is not expecting certain kind of results. He's looking just for the effort. Because these guys who came back the first time, they didn't succeed. They didn't hit a home run. But sure enough, they showed up. They showed up and they sacrificed and they did what they could. And that's all Jesus says we need to do. Because he says, you know what? I conquer. You just get to be part of the army. You see? So this is what's happening, and we're going to continue to go through it, and it's a wonderful thing. I want us to close with this image. You guys go to the movies? It's amazing. I watch the movies. I'm one of those guys who stay until the very last part when they turn off the projector. You never saw such a list of names. They name all the caterers now, and the hairdressers, and on and on and on. You know why? Because they had a part in making the movie, right? The people in the back, in the back doing it, the people who are doing the prep, the people who are doing the cleaning up. You know what? God's always been doing that. The Bible's the only book that gives and wastes real estate. Parchment, lambskin is very expensive back in those days. But this is the only religious book I know that gives us so many lists of names that we cannot pronounce. Okay? And that's what God remembers. God cares. And by naming names, the individual is important. Hallelujah? Yeah. Let's pray. Father, we come to you. We thank you that you set a pace, you set a standard, you show us how to behave as children of the living God. So help us to absorb these values, these practices. Help us then to think creatively and find ways that we can do it ourselves and we can make a difference for you. Help us to realize that even if we don't hit the home run, we got to show up, we got to take our swing, we got to be more than just locusts eating up the land. So Lord, help us to trust in you and take on the responsibility of our callings, whether as a parent, whether as a child, whether as a student, whether as a worker in the tech industry, whatever it is that we're doing, these are the responsibilities you've given to us, and help us, therefore, to be people who represent the good and living God. We pray these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.